and welcome back to another episode of Antiformal. Today we'll be doing an interview with Dr. Shannon Dulin here at the University of Oklahoma. But first, our mineral of the day is gypsum. So we've done a previous video on selenite, which is a special type of gypsum, but I want to talk a little bit more broadly about what is gypsum. So gypsum is a calcium sulfate mineral, and it's what's considered hydrous, which means that in its chemical formula it has water, which you wouldn't think by looking at it because it just forms these little blocks. You wouldn't think this has water in it, but it does on like a deep chemical level. It's what's known as an evaporite mineral, which means that ions of calcium sulfate are sort of carried in water, and then the water evaporates due to, heat, and then it just sort of leaves behind all the little bits without any of the water. Well, I guess a little bit of water in the formula, but most of the water goes away and it leaves this. And so you can actually see sometimes it'll form multiple layers because this will happen in the same area again and again. So it'll just sort of stack on top of each other where you have one layer deposited and then you get more water and then it dries up again, more water dries up again. So if you find gypsum, a lot of times you can say that this is somewhere that has like a lot of seasons that have differences in their moisture. So somewhere that has a very wet season and a dry season. It's usually white or clear. Sometimes you can get these little black crystals. And then Oklahoma actually is known, is the only place that you can find a variety of that's called hourglass selenite. So it's called that because it sort of forms a little almost hourglass shape inside. I'll find this one for you. But yeah, that can only be found out at the salt flats. So you can go and even dig it up yourself. There's usually like a limit of a couple of pounds, but it's like free April through October. I find sometimes that because of the way that it grows into these little sheets, and it's white and clear and pretty soft, it's considered like a 2 on the hardness scale, so I can actually scrape it with my fingernail. Sometimes gets confused for a muscovite mica, but this is not brittle and it doesn't form those really thin sheets. So mica will form very thin sheets that will and especially a muscovite, it'll be very brittle, it'll break very easily, and this won't. This will just form. If you break it, it's not going to create those little sheets. It's a lot thicker layers and a lot just sort of less flexible. So we will have Dr. Dulin in here in just a few minutes. Hi, we're back. We got Dr. Shannon Dulin here from University of Oklahoma. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us where you're from, about your school, whatnot.
Okay, awesome. So I'm Dr. Shannon Dulin, and I actually got all my degrees from here. I have degrees in geology and meteorology, and then I'm originally from Claremore, Oklahoma, so up by Tulsa.
Yeah, I'm from Tulsa. So.
That's right. Yeah, excellent.
So what really got you into geology? What made you become a geologist?
So we used to camp a lot when I was little, and as you know, Tulsa is very pretty and hilly and lovely, as opposed to out here, but. That's okay. And so, because we used to go camping a lot, and my brothers were actually in the military, and they were stationed in Colorado, so we'd go to Colorado a lot, which is funny because I am the director of our field camp in Canyon City, and I used to camp there when I was little all the time.
Cool.
Yeah, so I have pictures of myself 7, 8 years old in places that I take you guys every year. Yeah, so that's kind of how I was outside a lot, and so I got interested in what's happening outside.
So what specific areas of geology are you interested in? Geology is a very broad field. It covers just about everything. So what specifically are you into?
Literally every part of the earth, right? So I like sedimentary rocks because once again, being from where we're from, that's mostly what we have, right? We don't have volcanoes here. So volcanoes aren't really my thing. They're cool, but so I grew up playing around in rivers, and I really liked rivers and looking at the rocks around rivers and then the rocks inside the rivers. So breaking the stuff up into tinier pieces. And that's probably what got me along the field of sedimentary rocks in general. So I mostly look at sedimentary rocks. I've done some work on igneous rocks too. I don't touch metamorphic rocks.
They're cool, but they're a lot just
There are
different.
lots, that is exactly. And we just don't have that many. So we don't see them, we don't think about them a lot, not as much as we do the sedimentary rocks that are everywhere.
Yeah. So, moving on from that sort of like past or present, what sort of research do you do in geology?
Okay.
Like, there's sort of topics.
So I started out as an undergraduate, and I asked about doing undergraduate research. And so that was a big deal for me. And so I got stuck in the, not stuck in, I got a chance to work in the paleomagnetics laboratory.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so my research is on paleomagnetics, and I mostly look at sedimentary rocks, where a lot of people look at paleomagnetism in igneous rocks. So mine is paleomagnetism in sedimentary rocks. And there's all different kinds of ways that you can trap Earth's magnetic field in a rock. And that's basically what my students and I look at, is we sample these sedimentary rocks. Like right now we're working on the Colorado River. And so like the ancient Colorado River, when it first got there millions of years ago, we're looking at when it arrived and what the rocks say in terms of what was the Earth's magnetic field at that time.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we're working on.
It's cool, because there's a lot of ways to sort of map the history of the Earth in a rock,
Yes.
but not all of them are as obvious as just like looking at, like we talk a lot about in class, sedimentary structures. This one's a little bit less obvious. You can't really see it.
That's exactly right. So you can't see it, and that's the thing with paleomagnetism, is that you have to like go out and you have to stick a rock inside your machine once you get back and be like, I hope there's magnets in here, essentially. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what classes do you teach here?
So I teach a bunch of classes here.
That's a lot.
Yes. So I'm the director of our field camps. So every summer we all go out for 6 weeks out to Colorado. And so I teach that. And then I teach the class right before that, which is field methods. And then, as you said, I teach sedimentary geology, right? And then I teach some other classes every once in a while, Earth's past climate. I taught a class called catastrophic sedimentation, which is really fun.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It is really fun. And then I teach half of Earth history, and so that's a really cool class. That's just a very interesting tour of life and tectonics through Earth.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun when I took that with you.
Yeah, thank you. That was one of my favorite undergraduate classes too. It's really cool to just like think about that large scale. Like, what have we been through in 4.5 billion years? You know,
Yes.
a lot.
It's a very, you've got to really cram it in there with like one semester to talk about all of the Earth.
I know. I always talk to like other professors that teach Earth history, you know, and everyone tries to do it different, and then they're like, man, I wish I could talk about this. I wish I could talk about this. You just have to choose. So, yeah.
I feel like no matter what, you kind of end up sort of you take too long at the beginning, and then by the end, you always just that's how I would, if I were teaching it, I would spend too long on like
Right.
the Paleozoic, and then I'd get to the Cenozoic, and I'd be like, ooh, we don't have as much time for that.
That is exactly how I feel. I'm like, oh, the last 65 million years. We're going to talk about that in 10 minutes. I agree.
Well, I just get so excited about some of the older stuff.
I know, like this Colorado River stuff that my students and I are doing, it's only like 5 million years old, which seems crazy young, right? And all the other stuff I've done has like been, 300, 400 million years old, so it's very different.
I remember talking to my mom about something. I said something about like only 15 million years old. And she's like, oh, only. Only. Because you get so skewed thinking about these time scales.
I know.
And it just like
We
really
teach that
changes
it's so hard to find, it's so hard to like get into that mindset, but once you do, like 10,000 years is nothing. It's nothing.
Yeah, geology really trains you to think in millions and billions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Like the very long term. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which makes, having homeworks due in a week sounds like nothing.
Yeah. So, you are one of the hosts of the Don't Panic Geocast.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's pretty successful because I can't think of any other geology podcasts.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, sort of, can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I started that 8 years ago. Yeah. And it's a weekly podcast. And so it came from, I was an undergraduate geology and meteorology major. And I came back here for my PhD after working for a while. And there was another guy who was getting his degree in geophysics and meteorology. And so like we're the only two who have done that. And we just automatically became friends. And then when he moved away to get his PhD, we used to go to lunch all the time. And we're like, what are we going to do now? You're leaving. And so we conceived of this podcast, and we said, well, that'll make us talk every week, right? And so we get to have this scheduled like friend time, but also like we always talked about nerdy science stuff. And so we just kept that going.
Yeah, that sounds really like a really nice way to keep in touch
Yeah.
with people.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like, I mean, I'm sure we would have kept in touch anyway, but now like we're still very close, and we get to have our sort of fun like science nerd talk together once a week. So yeah.
So, outside of all of your research and your teaching and your podcasts and all that, what do you like to do when you have some
I don't
time?
have any other time. What are you talking about? So I have 2 kids, and I kind of do the same thing that like my parents did with me. We do a lot of camping. Like, that's a really fun thing that we do. My friend and I, we do a lot of bike riding, so that's nearly all my extra time outside of podcasting and grading papers. I'm a really nerdy crafter though too. I do a lot of paper crafts, like making all kinds of cool cards and stuff like that. So that's like my super nerdy alone time is me just paper crafting.
Well, you gotta have something to do.
Gotta have something. That's exactly right. And my daughter is 5, so she loves to help me with that.
Well, it's kind of fun because you can both do that together then.
It is true. Like, she's got her own little setup, and she does her little stuff, and she always draws like really cool pictures of mountains and all the stuff that we've seen when we're out camping. So that's really fun. Yep. I also have chickens and dogs and cats, so it's a big, noisy household.
Yeah, it seems like a lot, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, it usually
And
is.
then, do you have any sort of advice that you would give to geoscience students now about just either like their studies or just more broadly like going to college and whatnot?
Yeah, so I think I was the first in my family to go to college. So I have 3 older brothers, and like my parents didn't go to college, my brothers didn't go to college. So I was the first one to go to college, and that was kind of a big deal, right? And it was very overwhelming. But the thing that I did when I got to college was I immediately started asking professors, like, hey, can I work in your lab? Hey, can I do this? So as an undergraduate, I worked at the Severe Storms Laboratory, and I drove around like one of the like storm chasing cars. So I got to do that, and I got to work in the paleomagnetics lab, and that makes all the difference. So if you just go to class, and then you go home, and you're not involved, it's very hard to not get a job. It's very hard to just not feel like you're a part of that community. But if you insert yourself in the community through like undergraduate, I know you've done undergraduate research too, right? Like it just gives you a better idea of like what you do after you graduate, right? Like these are jobs, these are what people do. And it gives you like a sense of community too, which is a really, really big deal, I think.
Well, that's what I really enjoy about Pick and Hammer is that like I get to know other people who are also taking the same classes, and so it's nice, especially because the classes get pretty small pretty fast when you're in geology classes. So to have those close connections with other people who I'm going to school with all the time, it's kind of those things where it's like, oh, I'm not friends with the people in my classes, that's kind of going to be an issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because if you don't like someone and there's only 20 people in your whole class, kind of rough.
It's
good to make sure that you have like it really fun, because like we go on camping trips and we do game nights. We recently did a thing where we planted succulents and we painted the little pots.
That's awesome. That's super cool.
It's a lot of fun because especially a lot of geology gets really difficult, and so having like a support system for that is
a huge deal. We've actually done some studies that like people that are really involved have higher GPAs because you guys all know each other and you can work together. So my class, when I went to field camp, there was only 5 of us. It was 4 women and 1 man. So it was much different sort of than the usual because there's so few of us. And it's like we all wound up being like in each other's weddings and all this stuff. And we all still keep in touch, 20 years later. So it's a really big deal. Geology, I feel like you get to come together a lot more because you're doing so much stuff like outside of the classroom together, and it makes it really special. I mean, it's why I chose geology instead of going on in meteorology, actually, just because of like the connections that I had made, and it makes it much more different than a lot of the sciences and much more fun, in my opinion. So,
yeah. Well, do you have any sort of last things you want to say?
Oh no, I think that Pick and Hammer, the stuff you guys do is super exciting. I hope that everyone gets a chance to get involved with a club like this, or you can come to OU and get involved with Pick and Hammer right here. And it's really just staying involved, talking to people, about your interests can really help you like drive those interests forward.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here and talking to us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Next week for Valentine's Day, we're going to be selling some rose rocks here in Sarkees, and then a couple weeks after that, on the 1st of March, will be our first of our semester auctions. So be sure to come on down to that. We're going to have some fun things going on our big trip this weekend. So we'll have a nice fresh supply of some really interesting pieces that we find. So I hope to see you all there, and I hope to see you all at our meetings, and have a great day.